In 2010, Super Mario celebrated his 25th birthday. To commemorate the occasion, Nintendo released a 25th anniversary pack for the Nintendo Wii. In 2011, the Legend of Zelda series also celebrated its 25th birthday. To celebrate the occasion, Nintendo released The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, organized a concert tour, gave away free Zelda games, and not only re-released the Ocarina of Time on the 3DS, but also created a limited edition Zelda-themed console. In 2012, Kirby will celebrate his 20th birthday, and Nintendo are releasing Kirby's Dream Collection for the Wii. And let's not forget Kid Icarus celebrated his 25th birthday around the same time Kid Icarus Uprising was released for the 3DS. Sega released Sonic Generations to celebrate their mascot's 20th birthday, and Konami have released plans for a 25th anniversary celebration for Castlevania. Over the past few years, we have had many franchise anniversaries, but there is one that seems to have slipped through the cracks, even for the company that created the series. And this isn't some obscure franchise with only one or two cult classics. This is a series that has spanned 11 installments and has graced 7 consoles, and that's not even counting the many cameo appearances from its cast of characters. I'm talking about the Metroid series, and I bring you grave news. The Metroid franchise may be dead. Now, before you start spamming the comment section with your hate at such a concept, let me first back up. The series was first created in 1986 by the inventor of the Game Boy, Gunpei Yokoi, and the franchise is a trendsetter in so many ways. The series' staple gameplay has been based around the idea of non-linear platforming. The series was based on the side-scrolling action of Super Mario Bros. And the exploration of The Legend of Zelda. The main protagonist of the franchise, Samus Aran, is dropped in the middle of an alien planet or a space station or another science fiction-inspired location on her own and has to gain new equipment, unlock new levels, while defeating numerous bosses along the way. All the while, the player is immersed in a dark colour palette with revolutionary sound design to make you feel very, very alone. The first Metroid game was one of the very first games to let you go left, and that was revolutionary for 1986, and because of the huge expansive map, the game became one of the first non-linear exploration games and was one of the first games to incorporate a save system. But more importantly, it was the very first game in history to have alternative endings. That's right, the concepts that Mass Effect, Fallout, Metal Gear, Heavy Rain and many other video games revolved their entire plots around all started with this Famicom classic, and one of those endings revealed the shocking twist that the bounty hunter you were controlling was a woman. In an age where Miss Pac-Man was the only female character representing the medium, this was a huge deal. The first video game action heroine wasn't a scantily clad person to gawk over. Combine that with the undeniably cool Morph Ball feature and the revolutionary new concept of permanent upgrades needed to progress through the game, and it's a landmark in game design. Its console sequel, Super Metroid, expanded on these features and has gone on to be considered one of the greatest games ever created. Also, the fact that the faster you complete the game, the better ending you get, has made it one of the most popular speedrunning games in history. However, those two landmark console installments were sales disappointments. While they both garnered fantastic critical praise, they both happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Metroid was released in Japan for the Famicom Disk System, a console not many people owned, and Super Metroid was released in 1994 at the very end of its console's life cycle. As a result, the franchise was laid to rest for 8 years during the next console generation. However, during that time, something very interesting happened in the gaming industry. It caught up to Metroid. All those things that made the series unique ultimately became industry standards. Female heroes were becoming more and more commonplace, as were helmeted space marines. More processing power meant that smaller developers were able to create sci-fi worlds that matched the original game's tone and feel, and even alternative endings were being experimented with. Even the series' trademark non-linear exploration gameplay was taken away from it. Castlevania Symphony of the Night was released on Sony's PlayStation in 1997, with gameplay ripped straight from the Metroid franchise. The resemblance is so strong that many gamers have recently dubbed the series Metroidvania, and the Castlevania franchise has stuck with that formula ever since. Well, before it started ripping off God of War and Shadow of the Colossus. That's the ultimate paradox surrounding the Metroid series. Its early titles were so trend-setting, so revolutionary and so ahead of their time that when the industry finally caught up to them, what about Metroid could it call its own? When Metroid Prime was released on the GameCube in 2002, it found itself in a completely different gaming landscape, but it was the first game of the series whose sales reflected its praise, and it went on to be one of the best-selling games of the GameCube. In 2004, the game saw a sequel, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. Despite glowing praise, the Metroid curse struck again, and it was a sales disappointment. The main reason being it was released around the same time as Halo 2 and Half-Life 2, so that meant that 3 high-profile science fiction first-person shooters were released within a week of each other, and during Metroid's initial 8-year absence before the first Metroid Prime game, those first-person shooters took Metroid's place as the top of their respective genres. The franchise didn't do so well on the Nintendo DS either. Metroid Prime Hunters just barely pushed 700,000 units, and Metroid Pinball only sold 250,000 units. For what many people seem to consider one of Nintendo's flagship franchises, those are some very low numbers when compared to Mario and Zelda. Metroid Prime 3 for the Wii is considered one of the best first-person shooters of this console generation, but even that game struggled to sell, in no small part because of the release of Halo 3 and Call of Duty 4 at around the same time, and finally in 2010, Other M sold 1.3 million units worldwide, which is pretty low for what was hyped as a AAA game. Also, whenever a franchise is sourced out to a third-party developer, it's because they feel like the franchise has nothing to lose and is pretty much dead already. That's why we got Metroid Prime in the first place. It happened to Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Ratchet & Clank, Bomberman, and it seems to be happening to Metroid again. I don't mean to annoy Metroid fans or make them angry at me, I'm just telling it how it is, I'm just presenting the facts. The Metroid series doesn't seem to have a place amongst modern games anymore. That's not to say that Samus is going to disappear, it's pretty much a given that she'll be making her mandatory appearance in future Smash Bros. Games, but there's one inescapable fact. Metroid just isn't commercially viable, and it isn't all Metroid Other M's fault. Incidentally, the amount of people who claim that it ruined the character of Samus and how terrible the game is, who haven't even played it, is just staggering, but that's another discussion for another time. This just goes to show that Nintendo fans are the worst fans ever. They've spent the past 7 years complaining about Nintendo lacking hardcore games or games for the adult market, but every time Nintendo or third parties tried to cater to that demographic, no one showed up and bought the games. If Nintendo fans aren't going to buy the games they're so desperately begging for, then why should Nintendo or its third parties bother to produce them? That's why Capcom have cancelled all their upcoming Mega Man games. Despite being their mascot pretty much, they just don't see a profit in them. That doesn't excuse them not including Mega Man in their recent Marvel vs. Capcom games, but it just goes to show that just because you're from the golden age of gaming, it doesn't mean you're indestructible. At the time of writing, there is no Metroid game announced for the 3DS or the Wii U, leaving the future of the series in doubt, but if Metroid did come back, then what could it do to stand out? I may not be the biggest fan of the series, as my favourite game is Metroid Fusion on Game Boy Advance, mainly because it's more story driven and linear, which is what many of the Metroid fans complained about, but hey, to each his own. But I can still appreciate everything the series has done and the innovations it pioneered, but that's just life. Things come to an end, franchises pass, whether we like it or not. and it's not like Nintendo have completely ignored the franchise. The original Metroid and Metroid Fusion were released as Nintendo Ambassador games on the 3DS, and Metroid 2 Return of Samus has recently become a Virtual Console release, but I personally think that we won't be seeing a full Metroid game for a long time. Do you want to know how bad the situation is? F-Zero, who hasn't had a game since the GameCube era, is getting a mini-game in the upcoming Nintendo Land. Metroid is not. The most we can currently hope for is maybe a HD downloadable game on the Wii U, or maybe another side-scrolling handheld or something along those lines, if we're lucky. But let's not forget what happened the last time the Metroid series was pronounced dead. Samus has had one of the greatest comebacks in video game history. Who knows? If we're lucky, maybe she can do it again.